Good morning, everyone. I've been with you all since 9:30 this morning. It's been a fascinating chat. I think we are finishing off your morning, if not the session completely, but we're doing so in style. We're doing so with this excellent panel session and two great guests talking about advancing low carbon heating solutions. Um, Heat comprises half the world's energy consumption and contributes to 40% of global energy related CO2 emissions. Decarbonising our built environment then is one of the biggest challenges we face on our journey to net zero, but it also represents a generational commercial opportunity to those who can meet that challenge head on. Um, Here in the UK, heating our 28 million homes accounted for 17% of greenhouse gas emissions back in 2021. And the primary source of that was the combustion of natural gas. So there's got to be a better way. And the government's advisors at the Climate Change Committee have been pretty unequivocal that they think electrification is the answer. In their seventh carbon budget, which emphasised a really significant shift towards decarbonising heat in buildings, particularly through the use of heat pumps, their balanced decarbonisation pathway targeted a 66% reduction in residential buildings by 2040. Equally helpfully, let's hope once and for all, they confirm that there should be absolutely no role for hydrogen in heating buildings. At the same time, upcoming regulations on heat network zoning policy is expected to transform the pace and scale of low carbon heat network developments in the town and cities where district heating has always excelled. So while there's no silver bullet to decarbonising heating buildings at all, we've got two mutually supportive, aligned pathways that together have the potential to unlock billions of pounds worth of investment and deliver the economic growth that this government craves. Now, the three of us on the screen are much loved at dinner parties because we can bang on about this stuff interminably. But you will get much more from this session, please, if you start to put questions in the Q&A box. So can I ask you to start to think about questions for Laura and Bean now, while we start with some intros? As Jordan said, I'm Ken Hunnisett. I'm the head of Clean Heat at Triple Point. We're an investment management firm and certified B Corp headquartered here in the City of London. Since 2018, my team has been the delivery partner to the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero for their two flagship capital grant programs focused on low carbon district heating. The Heat Network Investment Project kicked off in 2018. It was followed by the Green Heat Network Fund in 2022. Since those schemes began, we've invested something over £1 billion, or at least awarded £1 billion to more than 90 low carbon heat network projects across England and Wales. I'm also joined by Laura Bishop. Laura is a chartered mechanical engineer with 25 years experience in engineering. She's been running her own consultancy, Infinitus Design, and now the HI Group. I should have checked with Laura. It might well be the High Group, but she'll tell me that when she comes off mute. That designs and develops large-scale low-carbon heating solutions, including heat pumps of all types. Most importantly, for the purpose of this morning, Laura is also the chair of the Ground Source Heat Pump Association. She's been in that role for 4 years, having served on its council for a year before that. She is a heat pump aficionado and believes that they should be deployed at scale and pace to decarbonise the heating and cooling systems, not just in the UK, but beyond it too. Laura, it'd be great to hear from you. Can you give us a couple of minutes, please, on your business, but also on the association? What are its aims and objectives?
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Ken, and thanks for the opportunity to share with everybody on the panel today. So I am Laura Bishop, as Ken has ably introduced me. I have been working with the Ground Source Heat Pump Association for 5 or 6 years now. I am, as Ken says, a huge heat pump aficionado. I've been working in the heat pump industry for 15 years as a design engineer and developer, mainly in the commercial industrial space. I believe firmly that heat pumps are the solution to our heating, cooling, hot water requirements in any building, and I don't believe there's many buildings that are fundamentally unsuitable for heat pumps. The Ground Source Heat Pump Association exists specifically for the ground source, which is unusual to the other types of heat pumps in that the ground is a fundamental part of that. And understanding the ground, the way that it either stores heat or rejects heat, and the way that we can use it as a heat battery is integral to these really efficient types of heat pumps. So we exist to increase education and knowledge about ground source systems. We produce the standards which are in law, enshrined in law, the way that we design ground loops, whether it's boreholes, whether it's horizontal loops. We manage and maintain those standards. We also lobby on behalf of the ground source industry. So, for example, at the moment, we're very, very strong in the ambient loop systems, which we can talk about shortly, I think. That's very low temperature fifth generation networks, which ground source heat pumps are perfect for. So that's what we exist for, and we're very grateful to all our members and for the input that they have to our industry.
Laura, that's an awesome start. Thank you very much indeed. You've prompted questions coming in already, so we'll get onto those in a tick. But let's do our other guest and say good morning to Bean. Beanland is a graduate of Imperial College, an associate of the Royal College of Science, and a founding member of the Heat Pump Federation. He's got more than 15 years experience, including 8 years with an installation contractor in energy and carbon mitigation and conceptual technology selection, procurement and installation, mechanical services and renewable technologies. Blimey, Bean, you didn't make that easy for me when you sent that bio over. Thank you. Over this time, Bean has overseen the technology positioning, specification and delivery of a variety of heat pump systems, many of which supply heat and portable hot water to listed and period buildings and to schools, rural estates and commercial buildings too. Commercial buildings being much the focus of our session this morning. Since 2016, Bean has concentrated on sector representation, the advancement of the industry, supporting the development of government electrification policy, future funding and affordability. He's also a passionate advocate for installer training and recruitment and education sector, about which we will touch on later, I'm sure. Bean, can I ask the same of you, please? Could you give us a couple of minutes on you, your career and the work of your federation?
Yeah, look, thank you very much indeed. And hi, Laura, nice to see you. Look, first of all, thank you to the audience for joining. This is a really, well, I think it's an interesting topic, but also it's a vitally important topic, I think, for the future. We're at an interesting juncture, I think, in the history of decarbonisation at the moment. So the Federation was formed in 2020. We're a lockdown baby. Our launch party was scheduled for the 19th of March 2020, so you can imagine what happened to that. But the need hadn't gone away, so we went for a soft launch and we're still here, which is great. The real intent and the driver for the Federation was twofold. Firstly, to advance a singular common electrification policy position to government that was heat pump centric, but didn't really care what type of heat pump it was. It was clear to me, I'd spent 4 years previously actually running the Ground Source Heat Pump Association. So Laura very kindly stepped into the seat when I left it. But it was clear to me that we wouldn't get policy advance based on ground and water source only. So we had to go for a much broader approach. So policy advocacy was the key. And the secondary function was to allow us to bring into the whole sort of fold, as it were, some very big energy players who were telling me they could see that electrification was coming. They wanted to be part of the knowledge hub. They wanted to contribute to the debate. They wanted to contribute to a common position because when they spoke to government, it was clearly a sort of vested interest. But if they were part of the collective, that was in many ways, more powerful position. So I think we've sort of achieved both of those things over the last 5 years, but we are still chasing what we used to call was the elephant in the room. And of course, it's now actually the room, which is the price of electricity. This is the single key factor. And we are currently almost in a holding pattern. Yes, we've seen growth, but growth in the domestic field supported by subsidy. I personally don't like subsidies. I don't want to build a business based on subsidy. I want to build it based on genuine technology advance. So yeah, we're here to make the case for the technology advance. And I think it's upon industry now collectively to work to get to a policy position on the price of electricity that we can make politically palatable.
Oh, Bean, you've teed us up beautifully. I'd imagined we would be talking about policy at some point this morning. Why don't we stay there now? You represent technologists and installers in your memberships, both of you. I'm going to be the boring money man in the room and say my primary focus for this has been the investment potential of the sector. Investment in all energy infrastructure calls for political stability and consistency. We're looking for that stable, long-term political environment. And our world got turned on its head last year. We had a new government. and that could have brought with it a course correction on policy travel for heat and buildings. But at the end of last year, we had some helpful policy announcements. We had a bit more focus on the Warm Homes Plan. We might hear about what the funding for that might look like a little later today. There was news of the boiler upgrade scheme. There was news around the clean heat market mechanism. I share your ambition for this self-sustaining market where we are not policy and subsidy dependent in quite the same way, but we're not there yet, right? And there's a huge amount of work to be done. Help me understand your views, please, on how you see the current policy position today. We aspire to a slightly different place, but are there gaps that you would like to see this government plug sooner rather than later? Laura, kick us off, would you?
Yeah, I think, I have to say as well, with you, Ken, and with you, Bean, I definitely also want to live in a world where these systems do not have to be subsidised. We've lived in that world for quite a long time now, so they have to stand on their own 2 feet. We could either wait for government to make the one change which would make this completely flip over, which Bean has already mentioned, which is the cost of gas and the cost of electricity in the UK, which is the worst in Europe in terms of gas being the cheapest and electricity being the most expensive. That, for me and for many of our members and colleagues, is the one blocker to mass heat pump deployment. So we could either wait for the government to either put in place even more subsidies, particularly in the commercial arena. There are no subsidies at the moment for anything that isn't public sector buildings. We could wait for them to do that, but we know that the government purse strings are strapped and tight. Or we could wait for them to finally do something about the gas and electric price. But if we wait, A, we're not doing what heat pumps do, which is decarbonising our environment. Or B, our industry might actually fall apart if we just sit on our hands and wait. So what I'm actually more interested in is, how do you make these systems stand on their own 2 feet without government intervention? And we're already seeing industry doing a lot about that. If we look at somebody like Octopus, I'm just going to pick them as an example. Time of use tariffs overnight, you can get 7p. You can run your heat pump if you have a thermal store, run your heat pump for 7 hours, fill up your thermal store at 7p. That's a massive, if you do the maths, that's actually a massive cost saving for a commercial or industrial building. So it's taking advantage of those kind of tariffs, making them work for us, and also the hookup of heat pumps with other technologies that enable people to generate their own electricity at much cheaper costs than grid electricity, have their own energy security. That requires much greater capex. But if you look at the way that we can make these projects stand on their own 2 feet financially, and if we enable private finance to come into play, which we've been talking about for a long time, that can actually make heat pumps stand up and work now while we wait for the government to work out what they're going to do next.
And before we go to Bean, Laura, you say work now. Are you talking about work now as in a parity with gas today? Can you buy and install heat pumps and have that market parity today under those circumstances?
Not just a heat pump on its own. If you literally did heat pump, replace the gas boiler with a heat pump, it will cost you more to install, it will cost you more to run. That is the fact. There is no getting away from that. If you couple it up with, say, for example, a solar array or a private, a PPA with the solar farm or something like that, and you get a good contract deal, then you can actually make them work economically. And when I say work, I don't mean technically, because technically and practically heat pumps work now, they do the job now, but it's the economics that people are really interested in. And for us to go forward trying to make people put heat pumps in on a carbon only point of view and saving the environment point of view, actually, I think we just need to stop doing that. It needs to work economically. It needs to be as cheap as or cheaper than gas, and then people would do it.
100%. Thank you, Laura. Bean.
The tag here is that the lowest carbon heat has to be the lowest cost heat. Funny enough, I stood in a supermarket queue the other day, and I'm rarely at the counter that sells cigarettes because I don't smoke, but someone in front of me bought 3 packets of Marlboro or Benson Edges or something, and I was staggered at how expensive smoking has become. £42 for 3 packets of cigarettes. And clearly, we've made a policy decision. We want people to stop smoking. We drive the price. And so we absolutely need to do something about the price of fuel utilities. But in the interim, because that is a thorny one, Laura is absolutely right. We need to start making use of time of use tariffs, of thermal storage, co-location of generation. So we're very pleased to see the lifting of the moratorium on onshore wind, because I think the ability to couple single stick wind turbines with big heat loads doing heating and cooling, that starts to look quite attractive with private wire supplies and what have you. So I think there is a lot that the industry can do. But of course, that takes courage from consumers, because they've got to start investing serious amounts of money. And I think what's really critical in this political phase we're in at the moment is that we protect the supply chain and we make sure that it's still there when we want it to really go. And I'm really keen that we particularly protect the British supply chain. You know, having left Europe, the one that we can do now is have a buy British policy, particularly when we're spending taxpayers' money, Ken. So when you're allocating your funds, I'd love there to be a position that says if there's a UK built unit that does the job, is right for the project, and is a competitive price, we should be buying it. So that's my flag waving bit. But we're in a tricky political phase at the moment. There was, for a period of time, a political consensus about the direction of travel. And unfortunately, we've seen that unravel in the last 6 months, which does make it all that much more challenging. But on the positive side, I think there's an awful lot of capital to be had. You know, I spent a lot of time last year with the banking sector. And if I had to sum up the conversations in one line, it would be, well, Bean, we've got lots of money. Where are the customers? And government has repeatedly told us, all governments, not just this one, that the heavy lifting for net zero will be done with private capital. But they need to allow us to bring that private capital in. And particularly at the moment, I'm keen to see a mechanism that allows us to mobilize private capital in the public sector, because that is the one area that is currently going well. Public sector decarbonisation scheme is there. It's not big enough. That's the problem. And as Laura said, the public purse is constrained right now. But I've got people queuing up to provide funded schemes. There's a historic memory around the private finance initiative where, you know, you had horror stories about £500 to change a light bulb. I believe we can do better than that. And I also believe we can arrange these schemes in such a way that the provider who brings the money and the project retains some skin in the game. So it's in their interests to keep these systems efficient and to really deliver. And I think the knock-on effect of that, when people see the buildings that they rely on in their communities, their schools, their hospitals, their doctor surgeries, health centres, libraries, whatever, all decarbonising with heat pump technology, there is a knock-on effect on the consumer.
Really fascinating. I'm one of those flag wavers too, Bean, so I am cautiously with you. I am certainly passionately pro the role private capital needs to play in decarbonising our heat and buildings. 110%. It's been a joy actually working alongside the DESNZ team on these funds, not just allocating the funding, not just making the awards to the individual projects, but going along the policy journey for how we eventually crowd in private capital to displace all of that. And look, it remains to be seen, but I mentioned in my intro that in heat network zoning, where the Department for Energy Security has identified that sort of started to identify and publish the details of the first couple of 100 heat network zones, the city and town areas where heat networks are likely to be the lowest cost, low carbon solution. There we are taking big steps towards the mandation of heat loads within zones, hopefully creating opportunities at scale, and that missing piece, that demand assurance that industry's been crying out for, that creates the imperative to invest ahead of need. And well, yeah, I think deliver all of this transformational change. We just need to get cracking, right? One of the really nice things about the problem we're confronting is that the technologies that we're also excited about exist today. In those conversations you'll have had with those bankers, Bean, one thing you won't have had to speak to them about and disabuse them of is all of the technology risk associated with, for instance, CCUS, for instance, with hydrogen. If ours is the tricksy bit of the decarbonisation pathway, it's the bit we can do now, right?
There has been a time when lenders were concerned about risk, I actually took a pair of lenders out from the city several years ago now and spent a day touring ground source heat pump sites to reassure them that they were safe in lending money to a particular scheme we were working on. And at the end of the day, I was putting them back on the train. I said, "So, have you seen enough? How do you think?" And they said, "Well, is that it? Have we seen it all?" And I said, "Yes, you've seen it all." They said, "Well, where's the risk?" I said, "Exactly. Where's the risk?" So we need to get that right through the finance sector and also through the insurance sector as well, of course, which is critically important. But there is a tension. You mentioned about getting on with it. There is a tension between individual heat pumps in individual buildings, ambient loop networks, and then more conventional networks, although low temperature, of course, in our world, in that if you put individual buildings with individual air source heat pumps, there's an argument that says, well, you've reduced the scope that can be included within an ambient loop. If you then look up and you say, well, if we put an ambient loop in here, we've reduced the potential off-takers for a higher temperature network which comes through. And there is a risk there, but there are two things that we should be taking into account. First of all, I reassure people, just because you've put an air source heat pump in today doesn't mean in 15 years' time when it needs replacing, you won't join a network because there's now one outside your street. And secondly, we're just not doing enough of anything. And the idea of these installations tripping each other up right now is just fanciful. We just need to do more because we need to learn by doing. And we are not doing enough to really learn the ins and outs of these things so that we can optimize the performance of all this stuff. We just need to crack on and do some things.
Crumbs I could lace daisies in your hair, Bean. Absolutely. I mean, I guess where you would draw the line maybe is in the context of things like the big public sector estates, right? What we don't want to do is deny those crucial anchor loads to the bigger networks, be they ambient loops or city scale networks,
yes, to some extent, but of course those big public sector buildings can become the center for the network. So you could say, well, we're going to do that public sector building now, but we're going to do it in such a way that it becomes the center for a future. We were looking at a town center down in Wiltshire where I live, big central hub, town hall, library, whatever. And then they started talking about the redevelopment of the shopping center. Well, of course, I immediately thought, well, okay, public sector bit in the middle. That's the anchor, which then means we can build that out into the redevelopment of the shopping centre, yada, yada. So again, we've got too little experience in doing those sorts of things and planning those sorts of schemes. And so I'd love to see some of those getting off the ground so we can start to learn what really ticks.
Amen. Thank you, Bean. Can we stay with risks and think about risks of a different kind? One of the areas that I think are struggling with across all of our associated sectors is around attracting and retaining the talent that is going to be the workforce that's going to deliver all that we require over the course of the next couple of decades. What's the work your associations and your member organizations are doing to attract the talent, to crowd it in, and where else are the supply chain pressures that are emerging? Maybe Laura, kick us off on that one.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so for the GSHPA in particular, that we have four pillars that underpin what we do, and one of them is education and training. So it's an area that we have been working on for a long time. And we are working specifically within industry. So most of our members either run their own businesses or are working for heat pump companies, heat network companies, low carbon companies. So we have got like on the ground experience of what's required for employers, as well as sort of industry side as well. We also work, I mean, in my sort of day job, we do a lot of work with further education colleges who also tend to work have students that are working on plumbing and heating and carpentry and all that kind of thing. So we get a real insight into what's going on in the colleges that are bringing the next generation up. One of the successes we had as GSHPA is the new low carbon apprenticeship. So that's been launched and that will be rolled out across the UK or across England, certainly, to encourage the next generation of students into the sector. So that's very much hands-on. How do you fit a heat pump? How do you do it well? What are the things you need to understand? What about transitioning from, if you've been a gas boiler fitter for 10 years, 15 years, what is it that you need to do? One of the things that I see as a risk is when you are deploying heat pumps at scale, for example, on new builds. I'm a part of a Facebook heat pump group. People post
Of course you are, Laura.
pictures. Yes, that's what I do on a Friday night. Looking at pictures of heat pumps. But yes, seeing the horror pictures of, 500 houses have gone in, 500 air source heat pumps. Oh my gosh, heat pumps squeezed in between a wall and a fence, pipe work all over the place, no insulation. So it really is we haven't got the time. If we're going to ramp up quickly, we haven't got the time to make sure that everybody's like completely and utterly well trained. That is the ideal. But it's always with heat pumps, or 99% of the time, if a heat pump fails, it's usually either the design or the installation that's gone wrong. So it's absolutely critical that the people who are designing and installing them know what they're doing and are doing a good job. So all I can say is that as industry, we're trying our very best, and also with HPF and with the Heat Pump Association, working together to try to make sure that the colleges are clued up, they know what they need to do, the apprenticeships are correct for where we need to be. But it is an uphill battle, I have to say. I'm seeing green shoots and lots of positivity, but those kind of 500 house developments where there's horrible heat pump installations going on is a worry.
And this is the tyranny of the urgent, right? We are desperate to get cracking. We understand the opportunity ahead of us. We've got the capacity and the capability today. But also the popular press is full of stories of question marks over the efficacy of heat networks. So very many of which have been debunked. But when you hear these horror stories about bad quality installations, it does nothing to further consumer confidence. Bean, this is a big. So sorry, Laura, go ahead.
I was going to say, there's just on the little green shoots as well. I mean, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that doesn't get reported in the media, and wouldn't, because I think sometimes the media just like the bad news stories, and they're the ones that get flashed up in headlines. But a lot of people that I know who run their own businesses have taken it upon themselves to set up their own training academies. This is happening up and down the country. So they are taking on their own apprenticeships. They're using their own 20, 30 years experience of installing and designing heat pumps to pass that on to batches of 10, 20 students who are then going out into the world. So we're not just relying on the colleges to bring them through, we're actually doing this ourselves, seeing the gap and just thinking we've got to get on with it and do it ourselves. So there's a lot of good news, but it's always the bad news that grabs headlines.
You're so right. I teased you about your Facebook group, but everything I learned about heat pumps, which isn't a whole lot, I've got to tell you, I learned from the Heat Geek Twitter feed, which is just awesome. The videos those guys post is really, really extraordinary. Bean, this is a real passion of yours. I know this education and recruitment piece. You'll have a view, I'm sure.
Yeah, so there are lots of people, as Laura said, working on the sort of apprenticeship, the retraining of the existing fossil workforce, and that sort of immediate tertiary education piece, secondary and tertiary education piece. So we don't need to double up on that effort, but our core focus at the moment is pipelining the pipeline. So the apprentice who does their first piece of work, either in heat networks or individual heat pumps or solar PV or EV charging, doesn't matter what it is, anything to do with the decarbonisation piece, including transmission lines, distribution, all of that stuff, that apprentice for 2035 is currently in primary school. If we don't start hitting them in primary school and starting to lead them in the nicest possible sense towards on-the-tools careers, we will not have the workforce we need. We're going to need something in the region of 400,000 additional on-the-tools technicians by the mid-30s to do all of this stuff. And critically, we've got to get the message into more girls. We desperately need more women in our industry. So that's a focus of ours at the moment. We've got a couple of educational specialists we're working with who are doing fantastic work. The responses from pupils and teachers alike have been absolutely outstanding. So that's where we are concentrating our effort. We're currently trying to engage with the Department of Education on the review of the national curriculum. So yeah, a lot of work to make sure that we are then following on the really good work that's being done already in tertiary and apprenticeship space, so that we can pipeline that pipeline.
I love that, Bean. Thank you. You've reminded me that I should do a shout out at that point to an organization called the DHN, the Diverse Heat Network. We've got a website at www.dhn.org. That's all about creating a diverse and inclusive workspace in district heating. We recognize that challenge you do, of the competition for talent at the moment, and the desire to want to ensure that the workforces in the district heating businesses that we're building today are every bit as representative as the communities they serve. And that feels to me like a really nice place for the industry to be. But this is a generational challenge. It's not something we fix overnight.
It's reassuring the parents too that this is a really worthwhile thing to do. And if you look at the sort of incomes that can be gained by experienced players in the whole decarbonisation sector, largely with no student debt, you've got to say that that's a really attractive way forward.
Completely. We did a call out at the start of this for people to put questions in the chat, and I am thrilled to say they're going in. The first two are technical, so I'm going to back away at this point and look busy. Leave that with you experts. So the first one that came in from an anonymous attendee: when will heat pumps be able to match gas boiler temperature levels, so the costly replacement of pipes and radiators can be avoided? Which one of you wants to break rank first on that one?
I'll take that one first.
We'll let Laura crack at
that. Okay. So first of all, there are heat pumps that are already able to go 120, 130 degrees C. They are already available. Mainly deployed, obviously, in the industrial sectors where steam might be needed, low pressure steam. We now can, with the advent of natural refrigerants such as propane, ammonia, CO2, we can get up to 75, 80 degrees, no problem. We can also do two-stage heat pumps where, for example, your first stage heat pump might do, let's say, ground 10 up to 40 degrees, and your second heat pump can then lift from 40 to 80 or even 90 degrees C. You can do that right now. I will say it's quite an expensive thing to do because you need to double up on your heat pumps and your overall COP is affected, so your efficiency is lower. What I always recommend to people is check that your building really needs 80 degrees, because why do you need to produce 80 degrees C water when your building only needs to be maybe air temperature 20, 21? It's something that's just historic. From years ago when gas is cheap, obviously it doesn't matter, just whack in any size of boiler, it doesn't matter if it's working inefficiently, just chuck it through the radiators and it'll just work and keep buildings warm. Actually, if you look at a lot of buildings that have, let's say a 1960s building, it's probably had some thermal upgrades. The radiators may already be oversized, so by putting in 60 degrees through your radiator, it may already deliver the temperature and thermal comfort that you want. So the starting point is not, how do I get 80 degrees out of this heat pump? The starting point is, what does my building need? What does my radiators actually need? What do my air handlers actually need? Because it's dead easy. It's more costly to, say, for example, I deal a lot with air handling units. So we automatically will just, cost in a new coil for an air handler to take it down to, let's say, operate at 55, 35 instead of 80, 60. That's a small cost compared to the overall 10-year, 20-year running cost of a low COP. So my advice to anyone listening to this is start with what your building needs. Do not start with, frankly, the lazy position. Sorry if that's really rude and offensive, but it is to just say, well, I need to just generate 80 degrees. You don't.
Yeah. Think about the outcome rather than the legacy ask. No, completely. We're going to get tapped on the shoulder virtually in just a second, but another question that came in, how would you recommend we manage the additional electrical loads these technologies incorporate into a building's load? At the moment, during design, worst case is taken, which is causing larger supplies to be asked for and can add substantial cost to builds. How easily can these heating solutions be recycled? So a cost about the relative cost of the electrical loads.
Can I just say a very quick one, and I'll give it to Vic. Just one quick thing for me. Don't size your heat pump to max load. Use your thermal storage. Understand your load profile and put in a heat pump that might do 98%, but might only be half of the peak.
You were good to your word, Laura. That was nice and quick. Bean?
Sorry.
Yeah, look what she said. But also, because we're going to be looking at much more co-generation, co-location of generation capability. You know, if you've got some solar on the roof of your industrial buildings, you've got potentially some onshore wind. There are ways of managing the load on the grid. So we've already got members of ours who are doing exactly this sort of thing in large leisure centres where they are combining generation technologies, thermal storage, battery storage to minimise the load on the grid. And we mustn't forget, of course, our good friend flexibility. If we can flex the loads using storage in all its senses, both electrical and thermal, then we can minimise the impact on grid investment. It's slightly complicated, but I think that the distribution network operators, distribution system operators, as they are now largely, are beginning to get to grips with this. Almost hardly a day goes by when we've got another webinar on flexibility and how we get to this. And I don't think we've got the answers yet, but there are a lot of people who are working on this, and we're beginning to see this start to offer some real financial advantage. Agriculture and horticulture have been taking advantage of flexibility in its various senses for quite a while now. So, a lot more to come on that, I think. But I do believe we can manage that investment. Quickly on the recycling, look, most of this stuff can be readily recycled in the same way you can recycle parts from gas and fossil fuel sector. So I don't think the recycling is an additional problem, shall we say, over and above what we've got now.
All beans. I'm going to be super cheeky and ask you for a 30-second answer to a final question. Let's go top of the shop, back to the political landscape that we spoke about earlier. We've got a spring statement this afternoon, likely to be budget consequences for our sector. Rachel Reeves is going to be standing up in about 33 minutes, I think. What's the one thing you'd love to hear from her? What's the one thing you'd like to hear pulled out of her red suitcase? Laura, let's start with you.
I would like her to ensure there is another round of public sector decarbonisation scheme.
Amen. So, Bean?
I'd like to see change in Treasury rules to allow the public sector to borrow money. Because that would allow us to quadruple the value of the public sector decarbonisation scheme, and that will drive the market and the supply chain and keep it healthy and encourage it to the point when we really take the brakes off, it's there when we need it.
Brilliant. And I'm going to throw in my two penneth worth as well and say I'd love to see £1 billion come out for the Green Heat Network Fund, and we'd be able to carry on doing that amazing work we've been doing over the past few years. Both of you, it's been a joy. Thank you. I think we're ever so slightly over time. We can expect a Paddington Bear stare from Jordan if he joins us soon. Thank you very, very much indeed. And thanks to all of you.
Perfect. Thank you. No, honestly, I was so engaged in that conversation. I didn't even care about time. And you were the last session of the day. So going over was absolutely fine. I really do appreciate that really, really, really interesting conversation. I think I could have listened for a lot longer, especially since there's a lot of things that you could have additionally touched on. Data centers, a huge market that obviously is growing in the UK, have a ton of heat that they need to get rid of. So could be part of the problem solving as well.
A ton of heat, but more and more pressure onto the grid, right? So we touched on it earlier, but this whole systems approach to how we can use that waste heat, provide low carbon cooling, but do it in such a way where we're also adding in thermal storage so that we are managing the intermittency of renewables and avoiding all the grid reinforcement costs. Jordan, there's no doubt about it. You're going to have us back, I'm afraid. We'll do all that then.
Yeah. Can I just say, if Elena Andre, if I pronounce that correctly, is still on the line, she put a comment in about capturing waste heat from transformers and substations, saying it's not warm enough for domestic use. It's not warm enough for domestic use straight into the building, but it is warm enough to put into an ambient loop to improve the efficiency of the heat pumps that are hanging off the ambient loop. So I do think that we need to be able to capture this waste heat wherever we can get it from. And Laura will give us some numbers probably, but if we can increase the temperature in an ambient loop by 1 degree, we will increase the efficiency of the heat pumps by several percentage points. So yeah, the fact that it's low temperature isn't too much of a problem. It's the waste that's the problem. There's enough waste heat in London to heat nearly 800,000 homes. That clearly has to stop.
Amen.
And there you go. Elena already agrees with you that it may be the case.
Yeah.
Thank you once again. I'm just going to wrap up the day, but thank you for joining us. Really appreciate that. And I agree, Ken, we would definitely have to have you back because that was a very interesting conversation. Thank you.